But I want to get to the JCPOA because I actually think it's an interesting discussion for Scott and I to have because I think there's things that we agree on there and things that we disagree on. Right. So this is the 2015 nuclear deal that Obama reaches. It's negotiated painstakingly over 2 years between 2013 and 2015. And it follows the interim agreement that the United States negotiated with Iran. And it's in that interim agreement in 2013 where the United States, for the first time, actually gives Iran the right to enrich uranium. There were 5 UN Security Council resolutions passed with the support of Russia and China that said Iran should have no enrichment capability and no plutonium reprocessing capability because of the fears that Iran would turn that into a nuclear weapons program. But in 2013, they give that up. 2015, we reach the JCPOA. And under the JCPOA, Iran is allowed to retain enrichment capability and reprocessing capability, but over time. So Scott mentioned these sunsets, and just want your listeners to understand what these sunsets are. Essentially, the restrictions that are placed on Iran's nuclear program, right? And there's some really serious restrictions placed on it, especially in the short term. And Scott's right. The enriched material has to be shipped out, not to the French, but to the Russians. And there's restrictions on Iran's ability to operate these facilities in Natanz and Fordow. They're not closed. They still remain open, but there are restrictions on what they can do with it. There's also restrictions on Iran's ability to test and install advanced centrifuges. Now, the reason you'd want an advanced centrifuge rather than the first generation centrifuge that Aku Khan, the father of Pakistan's nuclear bomb, gave to the Iranians is you need a smaller number of these centrifuges to produce weapons-grade uranium. If it's smaller, Lex, it's easier to hide, right? You can put it in clandestine facilities without this large enrichment centrifuge footprint. So there's restrictions on these advanced centrifuge R&D. And Iran gets significant sanctions relief as part of this. But the whole assumption here, from both an Iranian and American perspective, is these restrictions are going to sunset. They're going to disappear over time. In fact, 2025 is the year where some of the significant restrictions on Iran's capabilities begin to sunset, and all of them are effectively gone by 2031. Okay, so in 2031, Iran can emerge with an industrial-sized enrichment capability. They can emerge with advanced centrifuges that they can install in as many enrichment facilities as they want to build. Right? And Iran can enrich to higher and higher levels. So they can go from 3.67 to 20%. They can go to 60%. There's nothing in the JCPOA that actually prohibits them from going to 90% enriched uranium. And I think at the time, the Obama administration's theory of the case was, yeah, sure, in 15 years' time, but in 15 years' time, we'll be gone. Hopefully, there'll be a different government in Iran. And maybe we can renegotiate a different agreement with that government that will extend the sunsets. So that's the JCPOA. The reason that critics of the JCPOA, and I was one of them, we objected to the deal is not because it didn't have some short-term temporary restrictions that were useful, but that if you got it wrong and there was the same regime in power in 15 years, that regime could emerge with this huge nuclear program with the capabilities to develop nuclear weapons in these multiple hardened sites. Iran, we estimated, would have $1 trillion in sanctions relief over that 15-year period. And if you got it wrong that it was the same regime in power as had been in power in 2015, then you had some difficulties. Okay, I just wanted to lay out the case against the JCPOA. Now, to steelman Scott's argument, right, I think there's a legitimate argument because I actually didn't support the withdrawal from the agreement. President Trump withdrew in 2018. I did a similar version of what Scott was suggesting was I thought that the United States should negotiate with the Europeans, the French, the Germans, and the UK, who were part of the original deal, extend the sunsets as an agreement between the United States and Europe, and then collectively go to the Iranians and say, let's renegotiate this agreement to extend the sunsets. If you don't want a nuclear weapons program, then you should agree that you don't need these capabilities, and let's extend the sunsets for another 15, 20, 30 years. President Trump...
Somebody give me a screenshot of this. Give me a pound, dude.
There we go.
Agreement.
There we go.
That's fine.
That makes my heart feel so
And I
good.
think the Ayatollah would have gone for it too.
Well, so I'm not sure if he would have, but let's just a little bit of history. I think it's just useful for the viewers to know, again, the context, especially when Scott and I agree.
Yeah.
So a process was begun.
I'm loving this so
by
much.
the Trump administration. Trump appointed Brian Hook, or Secretary Pompeo actually appointed Brian Hook, who was the lead Iran envoy, and he began a process of talking to the Europeans. Now, the Europeans actually rejected this idea. And so at some point, Trump said, look, if the Europeans aren't prepared to get on side, then I'm out of the deal. I'm out of the deal. And if you're interested, I can talk about why I thought we should have stayed in the deal, because I thought it gave us some important restrictions in the short term, certain leverage. But Trump decides to withdraw from that agreement because he recognizes that the fatal flaw of the agreement, or the fatal flaws of the agreement, are one, giving them any enrichment capability, especially at an industrial size within 15 years. Right? And two, are these sunsets, as Scott said, under which these restrictions are going to go away, and Iran's going to end up with a massive nuclear program. So I think that's just important. We can talk about the JCPOA, the process, and everything else if you're interested.
I'd like to go ahead and quickly accuse the FBI and the CIA of framing Trump for treason with Russia and pushing the Russiagate hoax. I'm trying to agree with my friend here, because what it is that completely ruined Donald Trump's ability to engage in real diplomacy with Russia for his entire first term. Certainly for the first 3 years of it, he was completely handcuffed. It was terrible, as I'm sure you're well aware, for the future, now our past and current history of Ukraine, as well as for this deal too. Why couldn't Trump pick up the phone? I don't know the details here, but I'll take his word for it that the British and the French and the Germans weren't being nice to Trump. They didn't like him. They didn't want to do it. Why couldn't he pick up the phone and say, hey, Putin, I need you to call the Ayatollah for me and tell him, hey, you'd like to see him lift these sunsets too, and this and that. Why? Because they framed him for treason, so he was completely unable to engage in real diplomacy with Russia. And I bet that he'd agree with me on that one too.
So Lex, actually, could I just say one thing interesting? And again, I think it's going to be a later topic, and so it's going to be a provocative statement, but I think let's put it on the table. I absolutely agree with Scott. I mean, I think it was a travesty that the accusations against Donald Trump as a Russian agent. I mean, completely debunked, but I think it paralyzed his presidency for two and a half years. I agree with Scott. The idea that you would accuse the president of the United States of being a foreign agent for Vladimir Putin, I think is unfounded. And I thought at the time disgraceful, and I thought it was really important. I think Scott did really good work in debunking that. I would say that just a couple of days ago, I was watching a podcast Scott was on, and he accused Trump of being an agent for Netanyahu and the Israeli government. So I think, again, the accusations that the president of the United States is a foreign agent for some foreign government, I think we should just put all of that aside in any discussion and just say President Trump makes his own decisions, whether we agree with them or agree with them. But he's not working for the FSB and he's not working for Mossad. President Trump makes his own decisions based on American national security.
No, I was making a point. That's hyperbole making a point, but he did. In fact, could you Google this for me? Because I always forget exactly how many hundreds of millions of dollars that he took from Sheldon Adelson and Miriam Adelson.
Who are Americans, by the way.
Who are Americans, who Sheldon Adelson said his only regret in life is that he served in the American army instead of the IDF, and said America should nuke Iran in order to get them to give up their nuclear weapons. He said, I have one issue, Israel. And they gave Trump hundreds of millions of dollars over 3 campaigns. That's not just a geez. I really hope you'll think of me in the future.
Scott, first of all, a couple of things. So one, there's a lot of people that are friends with Trump and try to gain influence. I believe that Trump is an American, is making his own decisions. Let's, for the purpose of this conversation, just focus on that and see what are the right decisions and what are the wrong decisions. And maybe,
I wonder what decisions I could get you to make if I gave you hundreds of millions of dollars.
Well, me personally, you couldn't give me it doesn't matter.
I couldn't even get you to drop in on a vert ramp or nothing for $100 million.
Nothing. You cannot control my decisions with money.
It's the American system, Lex. That's how it works. It's money.
I appreciate
right?
that. Yeah. We can go down that route.
It's the same if we were talking about Archer Daniels Midland Company throwing hundreds of millions of dollars around. They get policies based on their hundreds of millions of dollars. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? All that.
So, Lex, I think you're right. I mean, I think Elon Musk spent, $400 million to helping Trump get elected. And obviously, there are a number of philanthropists. I think clearly his son, Don Jr., has had a lot of influence in who gets selected in these positions in the Pentagon, the NSC. I think Tucker Carlson has had a lot of influence. So I think, as you say, he surrounds himself with people who have certain ideas, ideologies, policies. The president makes his own decisions. I just want to touch on just one thing, because I don't want to leave this alone. Just out of respect for the victims of Iran-backed terrorism and hostage taking and assassinations since 1979. This is the regime that took hostages in 79, took our diplomats hostage. Scott says, 83 was really the only thing that happened, and throws out a lot of information, certainly some pretty breathtaking accusations that somehow the Israelis knew about this and didn't tell the Americans. And
It's a Mossad officer's accusation.
Yeah.
Victor Ostrovsky is his name.
Yeah, I know exactly who he is, and he's been widely discredited. And having an axe to grind with Mossad. But anyway, not only 83, but all through the 90s, the 2000s, 2010s, 2020s, there have been hundreds of attacks, of assassinations, of hostage taking. There are thousands of Americans who have been killed and maimed by the regime.
Can you be specific what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a whole list.
Sure.
Literally, I'm happy to pull it up. Lex, I shared it with you. It's a long list of attacks all through the 80s and 90s. I mean, everything from the, Khobar Towers.
The Khobar Towers was Al-Qaeda.
That
was Osama bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
Yeah, let him lay it out, please.
All right, let's hear him.
Yeah.
I got my pen in my hand. Go ahead.
Yeah. And again, according to U.S. intelligence findings, it was actually Hezbollah that worked with Al-Qaeda, trained Al-Qaeda in that attack in the Khobar Towers. They were kidnapping our diplomats in Beirut. They launched attacks against our soldiers while in Iraq. The notion that somehow
I already debunked that.
No, I don't think. Well, you say you debunked it. You just made your claim. But those were Iran-backed militias, backed by Qasem Soleimani, who Scott referred to, who was the commander of the IRGC Quds Force, who supplied them with those IEDs, or those EFPs, actually, those explosive. Well, okay, again, this has been all confirmed by...
Why don't you search Alyssa Rubin, New York Times, EFP factory? Or you can look in the Christian Science Monitor for Operation Eagle Claw, where they found these things. It's easy to find in my book. You can flip right to soda straws and EFPs, and you see where I have all my citations for the solid dozen American newspaper reporters who were embedded with American soldiers who found these factories in Iraqi Shiistan, with Iraqi Arabs working the machines, not Iran.
So I'd like your viewers to Google not just a couple of sources, but actually Google the U.S. government reports that did a whole after-action report on the Iraq War. All the mistakes were made in the Iraq War, and there were legion of mistakes made. But it was very clear that Iran had actually provided the technology, the training, the funding for these Iran-backed militias to kill Americans. I mean, I could see Scott.
In fact, they even learned the method from Lebanese Hezbollah that got it from the IRA. They didn't even get the technique from the Iranians at all.
Yeah. So Lebanese Hezbollah, as I'm sure all your listeners know, has been trained, financed.
That's true. But they got
supported
it from
by
IRA.
Iran.
The copper core bombs
years.
And that design did not come from Persia.
Yeah. So again, I think we all admit, Scott admits as well, that Hezbollah was trained, financed, and supported by Iran. Hezbollah has been responsible for many of these terrorist attacks.
Where does Hezbollah come from? It's a reaction to the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, where they went after the PLO and horribly mistreated the poor local Iraqi Shiites until they rose up and created these militias to fight in self-defense. That's where Hezbollah comes from.
Hezbollah was actually created by the IRGC before the Israeli invasion.
How about the head of the CIA's bin Laden unit? Michael Scheuer says it was Osama bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed that did the Khobar Towers attack. And who did they kill? They killed 19 American airmen who were stationed there to bomb Iraq from bases in Saudi Arabia under the Israeli insisted upon dual containment policy of Bill Clinton.
What's amazing
that came from Yitzhak Shamir, who had sent his man Martin Indyk to work for Bill Clinton and push the dual containment policy, is where that comes from in the first place. The main reason Al-Qaeda turned against the United States. And the Khobar Towers attack was bin Laden, and he bragged about it himself to Abdel Bari Atwan, the reporter from Al-Quds Al-Arabi in London, and spent days with him and bragged all about it and blessed the martyrs and the rest of that, and is widely discredited the claim that it was Iranian-backed Shiite Hezbollah that did the Khobar Towers attack. That was what the Saudi government told the U.S. In fact, there's a great documentary about John O'Neill, who was the head of FBI counterterrorism, who told Louis Freeh, boss, the Saudis are blowing smoke up your ass about this Hezbollah thing. It was Al-Qaeda that did it. And then Louis Freeh got all upset because he used the A word. He's a very conservative Catholic guy, Louis Freeh, and then refused to listen to another word from John O'Neill about it.
So what we know now from Scott, because he's given certainly a lot of context to how he actually sees things, is here's who lies to you and here's who doesn't. U.S. government lies to you. Israeli government lies to you. The Israelis clearly lie to you. Mendacious bunch. Saudis lie to you. But you know who doesn't lie to you, actually? Hezbollah doesn't lie to you. Al-Qaeda doesn't lie to you.
I didn't cite Al-Qaeda
and
or
the Ayatollah,
or I cited Osama himself.
And the Ayatollah of Iran.
I cited Michael Scheuer, the chief of the CIA's Bin Laden unit.
So make it clear here. The
Iranians, trusting Hezbollah.
The Iranians,
did you get that?
Scott, straight up, I hear you, but you're interrupting. And please, just honestly, it's not about the content, but honestly.
How come you're not saying him? Isn't that weird that you just said he trusts Hezbollah, even though he didn't say anything about trusting Hezbollah?
I'm not calling out the content. I'm calling out the interruptions. He hasn't interrupted you. It's great. I'm loving the back and forth. Yeah. It's great, but just a little less talking over each other. That's all.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, the sort of view of the regime in Iran, and I think Scott wisely said at the beginning of this discussion, what did you say? I don't have any love for the Ayatollah. I'm a Texan. I don't have any love for the Ayatollah in Iran. And yet, despite the fact Scott doesn't have love for the Ayatollah, and I agree with him, and I think he's being sincere, in every discussion that we've had on every topic, it's always about everyone's lying except the Ayatollah in Iran. He's not lying about having a nuclear weapons program. He didn't actually support all of these terrorist organizations that he founded, financed, and supported to kill Americans. It wasn't the Ayatollah in Iran. He's not lying about his deception campaign against the United States. He's not lying about negotiations with the Americans. It's the Americans' fault all the time. So he's presented all the time in Scott's conception here as a sincere actor who doesn't want to develop nuclear weapons, who doesn't actually want to kill Americans. He's just always a victim of American and Israeli aggression. I think it's an interesting conception. I think let's talk about it. And I'm fascinated by the conception because it's very contrary to mine, obviously. It's very contrary to, I think, decades of overwhelming evidence that the Islamic Republic has been at war with the United States since 1979. And, I don't take too much stock in what people say. I take stock in what they do. So, death to America, death to Israel could just be a slogan. It could be just propaganda. But when it's actually operationalized, then you start to ask, well, maybe it's not just propaganda. Maybe it's intention operationalized into capabilities. What we're forgetting here, and again, it's this causal relationship. It's we aggress against Iran, and the Israelis aggress against Iran, and Iran is always reacting. I mean, let's give the Iranians their due, because Khomeini made it very clear when he established the Islamic Republic that there will be a revolutionary and expansionist regime, and they will expand their power through the Middle East. And so he built, and to his credit, was very successful until October 7th, this axis of resistance, as he calls it, which are these terror proxy armies, Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Iraqi Shiite militias, the Houthis in Yemen, right? And certainly supporting the Assad regime in Syria. He built a very, very impressive and deadly axis that he turned against the United States and against Israel, which saw its culmination on October 7th. I think after October 7th, that was a huge miscalculation for Khamenei, and we've seen the results of what's happened to his axis of resistance through quite devastating Israeli military capabilities over the past number of months. But he has an ideology, and I think where I agree with Scott is I'm not sure if Khamenei would actually use a nuclear weapon against Israel, the United States, because I don't think Khamenei is suicidal. But I think what Khamenei wants is he wants a nuclear weapon as a backstop for his conventional power, right? It's very much the Kim Jong-un model of North Korea, right? I'm going to have nuclear weapons with ICBMs to threaten America, but what I'm actually going to do is threaten South Korea with having massive conventional capabilities on the DMZ that I could take South Korea in a week. I could destroy in a week. So you, the United States and South Korea, have no military option. That's Khamenei's view. He can actually, building up this massive ballistic missile arsenal that he's unleashed in the past 12 days, that according to, again, the U.S. and Israel, was going to go from 2,000 to 6,000 to 20,000. That from Khamenei's perspective, he didn't need to drop a nuclear bomb on Tel Aviv. What he needed to do was use the threat of nuclear escalation in order to use his conventional capabilities, his missiles, to destroy Tel Aviv. And you've already seen the damage from just a few dozen ballistic missiles getting through, the kind of damage that he's wrought on Tel Aviv already. That is the conception that Khamenei has. It's a revolutionary regime. It aggresses. And I do think it's interesting, and I think we should talk about it.
Actually, that's a good cue.
Take a bathroom
Let's
break?
take a bathroom
All
break.
right.
Okay, we took a quick break, and now Scott.
Yeah. Okay. So a few things there. First of all, on Ahmad, the pre-2003 nuclear weapons research, the CIA estimate in 2007 concluded that all research had stopped in 2003. And Seymour Hersh reported that the reasoning behind that was mainly that America had gotten rid of Saddam Hussein for them. Now, in Gareth Porter's book, Manufactured Crisis, he shows that the major conclusion that the DIA had made that the Iranians were researching nuclear weapons was based on some invoices that they had intercepted for some dual-use materials, some specialty magnets and things that they thought, boy, this looks like this could be part of a weaponization program, a secret program here. And, Gareth Porter, who's a really great critic of all of these policies and claims, says, hey, this was a good faith misunderstanding by DIA. They were doing their job. But it turned out the IAEA later, when America gave them that information, the IAEA went and verified, oh, there's the magnet, and there's this, and there's that. And all those dual-use items actually were being used for civilian purposes. And so then, as Gareth writes in his book, the only real reason that the NIE said that they even had a program before 2003 was essentially because they didn't want to dispute their last mistaken conclusion. So they said, okay, well, that was right up until then, but that was when that changed. And then the other half of their reason for accepting that there ever was a nuclear weapons research program in the country before 2003 was the smoking laptop. And I'm sorry, I think I misspoke earlier when I said that the laptop was in 2005. That was just the Washington Post story that had a bunch of stuff about it. That was in 2003 as well, or 2004 possibly. So this was why but it was still all, again, forged by the Israelis and funneled through the MEK cult, but was obsolete essentially and had nothing in it. At least the accusations in it weren't past 2003. And so there's really no reason to believe that there was actually a nuclear weapons research program even before 2003, which then again, the National Intelligence Council says ended in 2003 and hasn't been restarted
Scott, can I ask you a question? Just not a comment by me, but a question, just your perspective. So just so I understand this. So the nuclear archive, this massive archive that the Israelis were able to take out of Tehran, bring to the United States, bring to the IAEA, which is very detailed, blueprints.
It's just the alleged studies documents again. It's the same stuff from the smoking laptop.
Yeah. So let me just ask you, because it's huge and it's very detailed, and it shows clearly that Iran had an active nuclear weapons program, certainly until 2003, and then we can have a discussion about what happened after that. Are you suggesting that that's all been forged by Israel?
Yes, nothing in this smoking laptop held up.
Not the laptop, but this entire archive that they pulled out with diskettes.
See, you're thinking of like
blueprints,
the big photo op with all the folders of documents behind them and all.
I've seen it. I've seen many of the documents. There's thousands of pages. I'm asking. This is not what I'm claiming. Is that all forged by Israel?
Is that not all about the uranium tetrafluoride and the warhead that David Albright debunked and all the same claims that were in the smoking laptop from the Bush years?
David Albright actually wrote an entire book. It's a very detailed book. Your listeners should Google it. It's David Albright and the archive, where he goes in. He went in detail, and he confirms the information in that archive that Iran had an active program under something called Ahmad to develop 5 atomic weapons. So again, you and I can debate this all day.
Now, this would have been before Natanz was even dug and before a single centrifuge was spinning, right?
Forget all of that.
I'm just making sure everybody understands, assuming that was true. We're talking about a piece of paper.
But it's not a piece of paper. It's a massive archive. I'm just asking the question. You believe Mossad fabricated all of this as a lie to deceive the United States, the IAEA, and the international community? That's just my question.
My understanding is that there's nothing significant in the 2018 archive that was not already in the debunked claims from the laptop.
But my question is not that it's debunked, because we can argue about whether it's debunked or not, but are you saying that Mossad fabricated it?
Yeah.
That's what you're claiming.
Yeah, because the CIA admitted that there was no laptop, and Ollie Heinonen admitted that
laptop.
he got it
I'm
from
not
the
asking about the
MEK.
laptop. I'm
He
not
got
asking
it
about
from
the
the
laptop.
MEK, and where did the MEK get it? The MEK got it from the Israelis.
Scott, I'm not asking about the laptop. I'm asking about this huge archive that was sitting in a warehouse in Tehran,
I don't know the truth behind those documents. I don't believe Israeli claims of what they were and where they came from without, for example, reading Albright's book and seeing what he has to say about all of that. I don't take Netanyahu's claims. And okay, so what's so significant in there? You say that there's a document that has a plan to make 5 bombs, but isn't the rest of the proof the same? Green salt experiments and the warhead for the missile that David Albright showed was obviously fake, because the warhead was purportedly being designed for a missile that was now going to have an entirely different nose cone on it.
No, so David Albright, again, we should bring David Albright here.
David Albright is a prominent physicist and nuclear proliferation expert known for his detailed research and publication on nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
He has a bunch of books peddling Iran's perilous pursuit of nuclear weapons, plutonium, and highly enriched uranium, 1996, and so on.
Yeah. So folks should read the book on the archive, because David had full access to the archive, all the detailed documents and blueprints, and he writes a book that, again, the conclusion of which is Iran had an active nuclear weapons program.
No. The conclusion of which was they were researching it right before 2003. They had no nuclear material to introduce into a single machine, right?
Well, they actually,
active program meaning they had a piece.
They had already built a covert enrichment facility, which was only
they hadn't. It was
disclosed.
Natanz was empty till the end of 2006, right? They didn't even start spinning centrifuges in there until 2006.
They'd gotten centrifuges for AQ Khan. They'd built a deeply buried underground facility at Natanz. They were putting in place the component parts for a nuclear weapons capability. And Ahmad showed conclusively, unless you believe Mossad fabricated it all, that they actually had the plan to build nuclear warheads.
Again, Seymour Hersh says that it was when...
Seymour Hersh is not a nuclear weapons expert. David Albright has. He saw the archive.
Hersh's sources said
you're claiming
that when America invaded Iraq and overthrew Saddam Hussein for them, that was when they gave up even considering the need for it. Remember, the Iranians held a 1 million-man vigil for the Americans on September 11th. The Iranians hated the Taliban. In fact, the Americans thought Iran might invade Afghanistan earlier in 2001, and they hated Saddam Hussein. Yeah. So they had every reason in the world to want to work with the United States.
God, that's a distraction
after September 11th.
My
and the
question to you. It's a distraction from my question to you. Let's not go to Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and 9/11, and the Iranians, and 1 million people vigil. Let's just stay on the topic.
You're asking me what I already answered.
Do you believe Mossad fabricated that entire
I already
archive?
Told you I don't take their word for anything, and as far as I understand, the accusations in there are the same ones from the laptop that are already discredited, and I haven't read David Albright's book. You're distracting from me refuting this giant list of false claims that you made previously that I haven't got a chance.
Let's all agree. You're going to read the book. Maybe, Lex, you're going to read the book. Viewers, you should read the book. I think David Albright has done a meticulous job. By the way, just warning, it's a big book, very detailed, hundreds of pages, and he goes through it in meticulous detail in analyzing this archive and showed, again, that Iran had an active nuclear weapons program designed to build 5 atomic warheads. Now, we can talk about what happened after 2003, and did they make the decision to totally stop it?
Yeah, God changed his mind after the neoconservatives lied America into war with Iraq for Ariel Sharon.
So just to clarify, you, Mark, and David Albright believe that Iran was developing a nuclear weapon, and you, Scott, are saying they were not before 2003. That's just to summarize what we were just talking about.
Well, I could tell you that. So Gareth's book came out in 2014, which is before this archive was supposedly revealed in Tehran. But in Gareth's book, he shows that the CIA and National Intelligence estimate of 2007 that said that there was a program before 2003 and was halted after America invaded Iraq was based on, one, the DIA's mistaken but sincere interpretation of these invoices for these dual-use technologies, and then the smoking laptop, which was completely fake and funneled into the stream by the Mujahideen e-cult, communist terrorist cult, the same people who've come off with, 10 major hoaxes. The NCRI, they just put out, the NCRI, the National Council for Resistance in Iran, that's the MEK. They just put out a fake story, 3-4 weeks ago, about a big secret nuclear weapons site in Iran. Don't you remember? And then nothing happened with that because it was another lie by the MEK. It happens all the time.
So, Lex, maybe we should talk about what happened after 2003. What about this 2007 NIE? What does it mean? Did it mean Iran had now abandoned its nuclear weapons program, or did something
They
else
never
happen?
had a nuclear weapons
All right.
program.
But let's
Right,
talk
they
about
had-
that. That's
they
an
had-
interesting
According to the
history.
NIE, they had a nuclear weapons research program that never made anything at all. So you can try to conflate that if you want.
No, that's
but
not,
I think everybody can
that's
see
not what
what
the
you're doing there.
2007 NIE says. What the 2007 NIE says is that, and you are correct, according to the 2007 NIE, is Iran made the decision after the invasion of Iraq not to pursue an active nuclear weapons program anymore.
Because we were putting their best friends in power in Tehran, in Baghdad for them.
Well, because the United States
So
had
they
gone
didn't need
in
to worry no more.
and in a matter of 100 days had taken down the Iraqi army.
And put in Abdulaziz al-Hakim's faction, the
That's
Supreme
fine,
Council
but-
for Islamic Revolution in Iraq, who've been living in Iran for 20 years.
That's why you and I did not publicly support the Iraq war, did we?
I publicly opposed it.
Good for
as
you.
far as I
Good
possibly
for you.
could.
And I should have
Thank
publicly
you.
opposed it rather than just working on Iran in 2003. But you're right. It redounded to the benefit of Iran, that invasion. But that's not actually what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is 100 days, the Iranians see that the U.S. military has taken down the Iraqi army that they had fought an 8-year war with, where almost 1 million people, Scott, as you know, had been killed. So they were afraid that the United States was going to march from Baghdad to Tehran. So they make a decision to end their active Ahmad program. Right? They make a decision to build up the key capabilities they need to retain an Iranian nuclear weapons option, specifically the enrichment capabilities at Natanz and then Fordow and at Iraq, giving them the plutonium route. And then what they do is they take the members of the Ahmad program, the nuclear weapons scientists that have worked on this, and they disperse them. So they're now no longer in a formal weapons program. They're put in a number of different research centers and universities. And Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who you mentioned earlier, who's in some respects, I wouldn't call him the Oppenheimer of the Iranian nuclear weapons program. He's more like, who was in the Oppenheimer movie? Leslie Grove, the guy who was actually responsible for the organization and the training and the recruitment, and the guy that actually ran the program as opposed to Oppenheimer, the sort of brilliant nuclear physicist. This is Fakhrizadeh. So Fakhrizadeh takes control of this program, and now it is dispersed, and it is unstructured in that sense, because they recognize that if they continue with this, the United States may march to Tehran. And so the NIE says Iran is retaining the key capabilities, the enrichment capabilities, to give them an option for a nuclear weapon. But we, the NIE, have decided, or we have concluded, that they no longer have an active, structured nuclear weapons program. However, since then, what have we seen? We've seen them actually do what many suspected they would do, which is build all the key capabilities that they need so that at a time of their choosing, they can decide to develop a nuclear bomb, whether it's a crude nuclear device, as you described, whether it's a nuclear warhead. We've had that discussion so far. But just to finish. So just understand the brilliance of Iranian nuclear deception, right? I think it's really interesting to get in the minds of the Ayatollah and understand this, because he doesn't want to provoke the United States. He doesn't want to see another Iraq-style invasion, this time of his country. He's building this capability on the enrichment side and on the reprocessing side. He is framing this as, I'm only building a civilian nuclear program. He's taken the weapons scientists who are building part of an active nuclear weapons program, and he's dispersing them, putting them under the guidance and direction of Fakhrizadeh, and starting to build out these capabilities. I mean, I admire, I have to say, I really admire the way he's played this three-dimensional nuclear chess game. It's very, very interesting. And I think he made a tragic mistake about 6 weeks ago when he rejected the offer from Trump at Oman and then provoked both an Israeli and then an American strike. But he was playing this game almost perfectly before then in building out these capabilities. And I think what he should have done, if I were him, I would have waited out Trump. I would have waited 3.5 years. I would have taken the offer in Oman, which gave him enrichment capability above ground. This consortium that was going to be built in 3.5 years would never be built. And even if it was built, you could just say, I'm not interested anymore, and challenge the next president, whoever that is, Republican or Democrat, to do anything about it. And I think the political calculation should have been the next president's not going to do anything about this. I'll be able to complete my nuclear weapons program. But he challenged Trump. He thought Trump was a paper tiger. He rejected that offer at Oman. And we've seen what's happened over the past couple of weeks.